Good evening. It's a delight to be here with you. My name is Elizabeth Clark. I'm an Associate Director of the International Center for Law and Religious Studies at BYU. And together with my co-moderator, Jason Perry from the University of Utah, we'll be conducting this meeting. Such a pleasure to have you here. This is really a remarkable program where we can highlight youth who are leading the way to building bridges and trying to help communicate across divides. We'll recognize our scholarship winners. We'll have some discussion from our panelists. But first, before we begin, we will start with Utah Governor Spencer J. Cox. We're delighted to have him here. Let me just say briefly that, I forgot our sponsor. I also want to mention other groups that are sponsoring this, including Braver Angels, the Federalist Society at both the University of Utah and BYU Law School, the College of Utah, Fairness for All Initiative, and the Templeton Foundation funding. This will be recorded and put on Zoom. We're grateful for family members of the scholarship winners who are able to be here with us today or join us by Zoom. But first, we will have opening remarks from Governor Spencer J. Cox. Spencer Cox is Utah's 18th governor, and he serves as 2023 and 2024 chairman of the National Governors Association. Governor Cox has a long track record of public service, serving as a city council member, mayor, county commissioner, and state legislator before being appointed to Utah's lieutenant governor in 2013. He was sworn in as governor January 4th, 2021. And in connection with this event, it's been a hallmark ever since he started running for office of dialogue, civility, and creating a better civic space. Unfortunately, he'll have to leave shortly for the question and answers due to prior commitment, but we're just delighted that he was able to join us here today. So please.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm so excited for this event. More than anything, and before I say anything else, I'm mostly excited about the young people in between these two older people right as well, and for their great work. You're going to hear more about them and the words that they wrote that were so powerful in building bridges and bringing us together. I'm grateful for the opportunity to have to share a little bit about Disagree Better and the way it fits so closely with what we're talking about today. Again, you're going to hear from these esteemed panelists and the great work that is happening all across our country. Now, I have to say, when I became chair of the National Governors Association, every governor gets to have an initiative, and we looked at lots of different potential initiatives. You focused on kind of the usual suspects of lowering the cost of healthcare, energy costs, and critical minerals, all really important things in our country. But as we talked about it, I came to the conclusion that we can't solve any of the biggest problems in our country if we continue to hate each other. And that is where Disagree Better was born, as we talked to experts all across the country, Braver Angels, who you heard, one of the sponsors today, the various universities who are engaged in the work of depolarization to understand the science behind what was happening. It became very clear to us that this was more important than ever. I have to say that two things are happening at the same time as we're doing this work, as we're traveling the country, engaging with experts and legislators, members of Congress, all over the country. I'm becoming both more pessimistic and more optimistic at the same time that is possible. I hope I can explain why. This extreme polarization that we are seeing, that is destroying our institutions, that is tearing our country apart. I have become convinced that this ends only one of two ways. That the path that we're on is completely unsustainable. Talking to one expert who studies failed democracies across the world, and over time, says that we're checking every box. We're crossing every threshold towards a failed state, and that it is very possible over the next decade or two that we see a complete failure of this country and her institution as we know them. This is the pessimistic side, in case you were wondering. I become convinced that this ends in only one of two ways. Either we, the people, collectively decide that we're going to stop hating our fellow Americans and tearing our country apart, or we start shooting each other. I mean that sincerely. Those are the only two ways this ends. And we tried the second way once before, and it didn't end well. But make no mistake, we are living through an 1850s type scenario in our country today. Now, let me share the optimistic part. The optimistic part of me is that most Americans don't like where we are. They're tired of where we are. There are many young people, and you're going to hear from them, who understand, and this is all they've known from a political standpoint, that this is politics is normal, but it cannot be politics is normal. Utah is an outlier, and we are being looked to. Every week, we have researchers, experts from all across the country who are reaching out to us, who are contacting us, who see something different, something unique here in Utah that they aren't finding anywhere else in the country. And they're desperate to understand it, and they're desperate to see if we can expand on it. And that's why we're here today, again, with experts from across the country, from prestigious universities who are here, because there is something unique. I mean, goodness, if you can have BYU and the University of Utah in a room together, we can solve America's greatest problem. Red and blue, right here. And so I am hopeful, but we have to be intentional about this. And I just want to address one thing as I conclude here. The conflict entrepreneurs, as I learned from my friends at Braver Angels, the people who benefit from dividing us on social media, on cable news, sadly, many political officials who benefit from dividing us, do not want this work of healing to go forward. And so the attacks come on two sides. And again, I'm being very blunt here. On the far extreme right, what I hear the most is that you just want to go along to get along. You just want to agree with everything so that there's no conflict whatsoever. That couldn't be farther from the truth. The people that say that either don't understand what we're talking about, or they're intentionally ignoring it because they are conflict entrepreneurs and they benefit from dividing us. We should disagree. We should disagree profoundly. Our nation was founded on profound disagreement. I am not asking anyone to give up any iota of their beliefs, things that they hold dear. That's not what this is about at all. It's about disagreeing in the right way. It's about having those fights, those battles, but in ways that we attack ideas and not people. That we see the dignity in the person that we are arguing with. That's the only way, by the way, to change hearts and minds. On the left, what I hear most often is, I'm not even going to engage with those people. Those people don't care about me. Those people don't want me to exist. Those people, right? That is also completely wrong, completely unhealthy, and will never change anything. So I hope you can see those two dichotomies. On the one side, it's toxic disagreement. We want to engage, but only to tear down and destroy, right? That is not good for our country. It's not good for our republic, and it will destroy our country. On the other side, we don't engage at all. We completely withdraw, which is just the opposite side of the same coin. It is just as dangerous to our republic. We have to be in the square together. We have to be having this conversation. And when we do that with dignity and respect, we can actually solve problems. As we saw this last legislative session between a couple people that I love very dearly, Troy, who is here with us, Mike, who is here with us, two people I never thought would agree on anything, who got in a room together and found solutions. Again, something that isn't happening anywhere else in our country, but it happened here in Utah because they treated each other with dignity and respect and found some common ground. Again, thank you for being here. This is the most important work in the United States right now. and we get to engage in it together. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Jason Perry. I'm the director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics and the Vice President for Government Relations at the University of Utah. I'm thrilled to be here with my co-moderator, with Elizabeth Clark. It is true, BYU and University of Utah, not just together in the House, but to respect with admiration for what we are doing to advance this critical dialogue in our state. Governor, this has been a hallmark of your administration. We're grateful for it. The program today is full of enlightened thinkers that we're going to hear from first in this order. First, these are our dialogue catalysts. William N. Estridge Jr., the Alexander M. Bickel Professor of Public Law at Yale Law School, will first address us. Then we'll hear from Professor Robert Fretwell Wilson, the Mildred Van Voorhees Jones Chair in Law at the University of Illinois College of Law. And then Representative Mike Peterson from the Utah House of Representatives, District 2. We'll first hear from each one of those individuals in that order.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the Governor, the University of Utah, and BYU for holding this conference, and of course the other organizers. This is very much, it seems to me, within the great tradition of the Church of Jesus Christ, and that is the idea of peacemaking, which I think is a great theme of religion generally, and of the religion here in Utah in particular. I want to talk a little bit about the sociology of all of this and the challenges that you all already addressed and that remain ahead. So sociology, as you know, since 2014, there have been marriage licenses for same-sex couples in Utah, 2015 nationwide. This is one of the couples in the Obergefell case. These two women have been raising 5 adopted children, 3 of them pictured here, in a very beautiful and wonderful way. And what they reflect is that lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and questioning people are families. They're families in our community. They are us. Okay. So today, there are at least, according to the census, 1.2 million same-sex households, 15% raising children. Not as high a percentage as different sex households, but still pretty significant. The number of teens, not always clear, but by some counts, it's many as 10% of teenagers aged 13 to 17, most of them raised in traditional households, identify as LGBTQ. These families, these individuals, face huge challenges, even in 21st century America, and you shouldn't blink those. They face challenges in the workplace. By Williams Institute estimates, as many as a third of the LGBTQ employees report not retaining jobs or being fired because of sexual orientation and gender identity. I myself was denied tenure at the University of Virginia by a committee whose chair called me a faggot. There still is job discrimination and harassment in the workplace based upon these characteristics. There's also harassment, verbal and physical, and even violence. These slides will be available with the data on Robin's website, but I just want to give you some idea of the number of this. And remind us that it was 25 years ago that Matthew Shepard was brutally murdered in a neighboring state. And then there's also some degree of housing discrimination. It's harder for these individuals to secure housing and apartments because of residual discrimination. Now, Utah has addressed a lot of this by statute. What I call the Fairness for All statute, Senator, now President Adams, was the sponsor of it and shepherded it through the legislature. This handsome man is not the handsome Senator Adams, but it's true, who is praising the statute. And here's a governor, previous governor, having signed the statute and celebrating this great law. And I congratulate Utah on that. And also on the new conversion therapy statute And I might add, as a Washingtonian, I teach at Yale, but mainly with Washington. The Utah delegation was very important, and the support of the Church of Jesus Christ was very important in the enactment of the Respect for Marriage Act in 2022, which I think was a victory for both families, including LGBTQ families, and for sensible religious liberty. Now, I think there's still a lot of work to be done in all jurisdictions, including Connecticut, DC, and Utah. And that is the most vulnerable among our sexual and gender minorities, are teenagers, school children. And the fact of the matter is, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, which is the main information gathering network for these kids, does an annual survey. The most recent one looked at 22,000 or more LGBT students, interviewed them. And the situation depicted even in 2021, 2022, was very discouraging. Almost all of these students had heard disparaging remarks, including remarks by teachers and staff. This is not just Utah, this is everywhere in America. Many of them were sexually harassed, most of them, in fact. Almost 12.5% were physically assaulted in some of the same ways, though not fatally, as Matthew Shepard. The schools themselves have been unresponsive in many locales. Most of the students harassed and even assaulted in these ways don't complain, and the ones that do complain usually find unresponsive school. Indeed, a majority of the respondents felt literally unsafe at their schools because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. And remember, a very large percentage of teens are LGBTQ, and that number is not going to decline, it's only going to increase. The effects for these kids are very bad. And that means for their families, and that means for their communities. The students who experience this kind of discrimination are 3 times as likely, according to the Gilson study, to miss school at lower GPAs. They contemplate dropping out of school and are discouraged for their education. These numbers are linked with many other causes to the astronomically high suicide rate that still persists for LGBTQ youth. The 2018 Journal of the American Medical Association Pediatrics meta-survey found that youth who are identified as LGBTQ are as much as 4 times more likely to have considered or attempted suicide. The Trevor Project found that one such person attempts suicide every 45 seconds. There are policies that it seems to me should be considered at the state level, the local level, the school level, that I think would tangibly help these kids and help their communities. Gay-straight alliances at schools are considered invaluable supports for these minority students. It seems like an obvious policy that there should be certainly anti-bullying policies in schools, not just based upon sexual orientation and gender identity. And it would be very helpful to have explicit anti-discrimination policies as well. Perhaps self-servingly, I also think that curricular and the books in the library should reflect the diversity and some positive images. A lot of great literature, and not just Shakespeare, is explicitly addressing these kinds of identities, as well as some nonfiction. I will make a plug for the marriage equality books that I published in 2020. And it's full of positive images of non-binary, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender activists, experts, professors who contributed very positively to the marriage equality debate. And I might add, it's also full of religious leaders who, in my opinion, contributed very productively to the debate, often as critics and often as constructive leaders once we had marriage equality under Obergefell. Indeed, the chapter entitled The Golden Rule, much of that chapter is about the Church of Jesus Christ, Latter-day Saints. BYU, one of the institutions that I've heard a lot of good things about is the Understanding Sexuality, Gender, and Allyship, which apparently has done some great things for BYU students. And I would urge BYU to incorporate that group more explicitly in the institutional structure. I started with family. I'm going to end with that. When April and Jane had a marriage ceremony at Robertville, they not only pledged their commitment to one another, but each woman pledged her commitment to each of their children. And so the hands that are joined are the two mothers and their oldest daughter, Ryan. Thank you very much.
So I'm Robin Wilson, thank you for being here. I want to remind those who are tweeting and our co-moderators that I have sent you questions already off of tweet. I am so grateful to Templeton River Trust for helping us support these dialogues across the world now and here today. I do have my checkbook for those folks that are tweeting. Somebody will receive a $250 social media engagement prize. So please keep the comments coming. And I'll be writing 2 checks today. So I want to thank not only my colleagues here for their contributions, but especially our 4 winners for their awesome essays. And you'll see just how often they are in a few minutes. The Tolerance Means dialogues are premised on the fact that we live in a world of many people with very different interests and needs, and we bump up against each other. And culture wars grow out of the idea that basically our interests are like colliding trains, and we have to one yields to the other. And I think that's wrong. I think civil rights are like puzzle pieces, and that they can be made to fit together. That requires the hard work of lawmakers, like the group at this table, and the governor and others, to get that right. Now, Bill discussed Utah's landmark non-discrimination law. Utah carried that ethos into a culture war that has wrapped the country, and that's the placement of kids, basically, for adoption and foster care. Now, even before the Supreme Court's most recent decision on abortion and Dobbs, there were 406,000 children in foster care awaiting placement in permanent homes. And with less access to abortion, we're likely to have more children in need of family replacement. Now, I should tell you, as an adopted child myself, my family changed the whole arc of my life. And before being adopted, I was fostered. And this culture war clash over children involves I think this awful subject, children themselves. And it's a fight between prospective adopters and agencies that I think is completely unnecessary. Now, we know that some of the biggest adopters in America are gay couples, not only the couple that Bill has talked about if he wanted to marry. We know that religious families adopt many, many children, and single women. God bless all of them for doing it. Some of the agencies doing the best work in this space are religious, and they're magically good at finding families for children. Perhaps you've heard sermons in your own churches calling families forward to adopt. Some of these religious agencies have declined to serve families that don't share their belief in Christ. Some feel that they can't certify adults as a family under their own faith traditions and notions of marriage, and so they couldn't certify them for adoption. Some agencies have closed rather than violate their religious convictions. So this happened with Catholic Charities of Boston, which have placed children for adoption for 103 years before asking and not receiving an exemption from then Governor Mitt Romney and the Massachusetts legislature. So as you can imagine, we have seen essentially dueling claims of discrimination. Agencies themselves claim to be discriminated. Sorry about the word. They say that they're being locked out of this marketplace because of religious discrimination. We have couples that have been denied placement of their children on religious grounds, they say, because they're Jewish couples not being now served by evangelical groups. What we see across the United States looks a lot like what Bill described. We have in the bumpy parts of this map states that say there can be no discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity in housing, hiring, and public accommodations. And some of those states treat adoption agencies as public accommodations. So there's this downstream effect of possibly closing them. Then there's a cross current. We have also a lot of the country shown in blue with specific laws giving discretion to agencies about which couples to help. So long as the agency makes a referral to makes a referral of the couple to another agency. Now you have states like Alabama and New Mexico that say, well, if there are government monies, you should play by government rules. But a private agency that takes no state money, they can serve who they would like to. We see laws that are not being enforced in Kansas, Michigan. And then you have Tennessee said not only that agencies can choose who to serve and not serve, but they don't even have to make a referral to another agency so that that couple could adopt. Now, I can just tell you, if an agency had told my parents that they were not the perfect family for any reason, and therefore not qualified to adopt, my father would have just left. He grew up in Appalachia, in very sort of limited circumstances, was very rocky in his own way. And if you had told him something like that, that would have burned him up, and he would have just stopped even looking to adopt. That's a real thing. It is a real harm, and it's tragic for children. We cannot afford to lose families like mine, and neither can we force agencies out that are really good at the work that they do. So the policies on these maps are not only clear, they actually frustrate the very project of trying to get children into loving permanent families. Now, I think this is what Justice Kavanaugh was driving at in a case that went to the U.S. Supreme Court called Fulton. There, the city of Philadelphia denied a contract to a religious agency, even though it hadn't turned anybody away, on the supposition that they would refuse a couple who present. The courts are frustrated that these questions present as black and white, as many of our colleagues in the legislature are, I think. They're frustrated with win, lose, without any thought for a middle path. So Justice Kavanaugh, you can see here an oral argument on this case, talks about a balance between two very important rights recognized by the court: the religious exercise and belief right, obviously in the First Amendment, he says, and the same-sex marriage right, he says, as recognized in Vertigo. And then he says, when those rights come into conflict, all levels of government should be careful and often should often, where possible and appropriate, look for ways to accommodate both interests in reasonable ways. And Senator Chris Wilson did that recently in this spring in a remarkable law. He crafted a balance that takes an all hands on deck approach with no couples turned away and no agencies closed. And he did this with a single common sense device, right? We can all huddle under the same umbrella. He put these agencies in a consortium, and he made sure that every agency in the consortium, or the consortium as a group, serves every qualified couple who presents. The state's obligated to make sure that under that umbrella are agencies that serve all qualified families like black people who wants to adopt. And if that condition is met, then, and there are agencies that serve all people, there's no reason to close agencies down. And it's that kind of magic that this state has continued to find in context after context after context, and we'll hear them in just a moment. And I think many cases we don't want culture wars, and you'll hear that from our efforts. But we are often thunderstruck that we can't find a way out of these collisions. I think that's not true. I think when people sit down, they can find these creative solutions, and they can bring us back to a place where we belong together. Thank you.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, and I'm glad to be with so many friends. Good to see you all here tonight. And I'm delighted for the chance to celebrate these four scholarship winners. Being with them and being with you gives me hope. People who are interested in dialogue and not just demonizing. I'm especially glad that the dialogue is being sponsored by two great universities, the University of Utah and BYU. I have degrees from BYU and from Utah State University, And despite my children and my grandchildren nagging at me constantly, I'm continue to be a cougar. Just can't seem to shake it, not that I've tried that hard, but anyway. It's appropriate that the university sponsor this. Because universities should be places where important issues are discussed and debated on all sides. After all, universities have the responsibility and the opportunity to foster thoughtful civil dialogue. They are critical in the turning back of this cancel culture that's become so prevalent in our world today, and which makes the job of a lawmaker that much more difficult. When citizens can't speak their minds without fear of devastating consequences, we've lost an important and valuable source of wisdom. The Declaration of Independence has 27 grievances they had with King George. Two of them I want to just mention briefly because they go along with what I'm talking about. Subjecting us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, and transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretend offenses. Pretend offenses. But our scholarship winners give me hope for the future. They talk about how engaging in respectful, meaningful dialogues with those who have different views is important in reaching common ground and expanding our own worldview. And they see that the solution to divides in the U.S. come from sincere relationships created by proximity to one another. I saw this firsthand this last year while working on the only law in America banning gay, trans, and conversion therapy. The only one in America that was voted unanimously. Both houses. The law does something vitally important for children in Utah. All children, including those who struggle with gender identity and sexual orientation issues. It protects conversations between therapists and patients so the kids are actually helped. I'm glad to see my friends Marina and Troy. You know, the more we talked and shared our concerns, the more we realized that in the end we were all seeking to do the same thing, and that was to take care of kids. We ended up with support from everybody from Equality Utah to the Eagle Forum to the Blog Cabin Republicans to Governor Cox, everybody. But let me tell you a little bit about the backstory. 3 years ago, the agency that regulates mental health in our state, DOPL, they adopted a rule that in part says conversion therapy means any practice or treatment that seeks to change the sexual orientation or gender identity of a patient or client, including mental health therapy that seeks to change, eliminate, or reduce behaviors, expressions, attractions, or feelings related to a patient or client's sexual orientation or gender identity. In a practical sense, it just really had a chilling effect in our state. Because you think about a 13-year-old girl, she's experiencing changes in her body and changes in her social life, including social media influences that are constantly bombarding her. She might begin to feel a little confused and unsure about her gender. She wants to talk and have an open and honest conversation with the therapist, but the therapist is prohibited from doing anything but just affirm. You can't have much of a conversation, and so they never get to discuss the young girl's feelings, wondering if she's in fact a boy. And think about the 14-year-old boy. Maybe he's experiencing attractions to his friends, other boys, but he wants to be chaste because he hopes that maybe he'll go on a mission someday when he gets older. So he wants to talk to the therapist and see if there can be some help. Maybe he doesn't have to act on the urges he feels. But again, because of the rule, the therapist couldn't do anything but affirm. Well, that, as you might imagine, provoked a lot of fear for therapists across our state. It had two devastating effects. One was that many healthcare professionals just stopped treating minors. They couldn't afford to lose their license. Second, a lot of kids across our state weren't able then to receive the treatment that they needed. I talked with therapists who told me about packing up their whole practice and leaving the state. They didn't know what to do. Therapists needed guidance and kids and their families needed a source of support and help. So we came together, and after countless hours of dialogue and multiple drafts, we found a way to forge a common ground. So the new law clearly defines conversion therapy and of course prohibits the barbaric treatments and therapies often associated with conversion therapy. It also clearly describes for healthcare professionals the discussions that they can have with their minor clients. For example, they can talk about body image issues, social pressures, or sex or gender stereotypes. They can talk with their minor clients, their parents about mental health, the development of their child. They can help their minor clients understand the medical, social, or other implications of decisions related to sexual orientation or gender identity. In fact, as the bill progressed, I started getting text messages from friends, other therapists. Hi, Mike. Just one example. Hi, Mike. Thank you so much for clearing the way in Utah to make therapy easier. In conclusion, and thank you. In conclusion, Robin tells me about the founder of the Templeton Religion Trust, which obviously funds this dialogue tonight. She tells me about a man named Sir John Templeton, who believed that no religion or person has all the answers. He defined inquiry as something between ignorance and knowledge. He said that humility can reform dogma in a more open-minded and inquiring way. Well, you know as well as anybody, the discussions about gender identity and sexual orientation can quickly suck all the air out of the room. Such discussions invite lots of emotions, opinions, and strife, but typically not very much consensus. But the spirit of goodwill you will hear from these essayists tonight is an example of how goodwill can carry the day. And Utah and its kids are better off because of it. Thank you.
Thank you, and we're grateful to all our panelists for their presentations. Getting us thinking and going. But now we get to the heart of tonight. I'm going to announce our two undergraduate winners, and then Jason will introduce the two graduate winners. They'll read their essays, and you'll get to see why we think so highly of them. Our first winner is a University of Utah undergraduate, Aspen Norton. Aspen is studying atmospheric sciences at the University of Utah. She's Spanish and Jewish and aspires to make the world a better place for everybody. Then we'll hear from UIU undergraduate, Kimball Gates. Kimball is a BYU student division from Kansas City, Missouri. She's a junior studying history with aspirations to attend law school and be an immigration lawyer. So, being a law for myself, I shouldn't say discourage you. Well, let's go ahead and start with that, please.
There, that's too much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dustin Marshall. I'm an undergraduate student at University of Utah studying material science, and I want to make a say about like how tolerance is easy for them. And I think tolerance, I think of it as it's also like a false dichotomy that's present in society. It needs to be in black or white, gray area. But what nice about that. So when thinking about tolerance, I thought about how roles are depicted in black and white lens. In opinion, must be one type of issue. It's either being A or being B, and even both sides. I mean, it presents a huge issue. Life is a lot more complicated in opinion A or opinion B. There's so many mixes of opinions. Especially in today's society, in recent news, Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which has completely in the news, and I've seen so many results of it. So like everyone follows social media was on conflict, but it's either pro-Israeli or pro-Palestinian with no real middle ground between the two. I believe you can find a tolerance, middle ground in this conflict. So as a Jewish student here in Utah, people often think that I must be pro-Israel in respect to the conflict. They also might think I'm like a statue of Prime Minister Netanyahu of the Prime Minister of Israel in my dorm room, which I do not. At the same time, if Jewish students are thinking for Israel, Muslim students think for Palestine. It's causing people to think that the conflict isn't this Israel versus Palestine, but Jews versus Muslim, which of course puts both Jewish students and Muslim students in danger. Public opinion of both Jews and Muslims is pretty low, and this conflict can cause and has caused increased hate crimes against both Jews and Muslims. I believe that people should seek to find a common ground when thinking about the conflict. It is possible to support Palestine, but denounce mosque killing innocent Israeli civilians. It is possible to support Israel, but denounce Israel killing Palestinian civilians. At least possible to denounce the killing of innocent civilians on both sides of the conflict. I believe it's possible to go pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian. I believe both countries are to exist and that their citizens deserve to live in peace and prosperity as they're all human. To compare the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to American politics, we see while control public proportion, control of border, healthcare, LGBTQIA plus rights, and climate change. These topics come up in debates, and House sessions and Supreme Court itself, and are often quite heated and polarized debates. Yet, I believe that people can agree on the same thing, as we all have opinions, sure, we might have opinions on the same issues, but we all care about the issues, even in different opinions. Like in elections, you often vote based on name and basic conditions, such as the straight line to get voted in. And we don't pay attention to who people are as a person, that they're actually like. And I believe if you take statements and because of politics on both sides, Democrats and Republicans, you would, and if you had brown Americans on the street, those questions, and if they agreed or disagreed, I'm pretty sure there'll be blurring the party lines, as I feel like party lines are often created in media, and people just raise one party and it's what you say with. We as human beings have a lot more common than we realize. This is why toleration is important to talk about. Tolerance means that you must seek to find a common ground, a gray area, not be blinded by the false dichotomy of beings being black or white as portrayed in the media. Thank you.
So I'm Kimberly Gates. Can everyone hear me? Okay, awesome. Thank you to everyone for the thoughtful remarks so far. I'm very grateful to be here today. So without further ado, when Abraham Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address, a 2-minute speech that has been immortalized in history, the country was divided. The United States was not divided by de facto political lines, but solidified boundary lines as the country split into two. Lincoln's speech outlined fundamental principles of freedom, unity, and the idea that all men are created equal. These important principles were outlined to advocate for Lincoln's goal that the United States shall not perish from the earth. Tolerance and compromise in the face of conflict are absolutely essential to Lincoln's message, as his words tried to unify a divided country. Divisiveness is not a new concept in America. As a history major, I've studied hundreds of years of divisiveness, lack of tolerance, and injustice perpetuated towards many different groups of people across centuries. When looking at history through the lens of the past, a lack of tolerance, when it should have been championed, is visible. From the civil rights movement to European interactions with Americans. Studying the past is an important aspect of looking forward to the future, and evidence from throughout history is indicative of the importance of tolerating different groups, ideas, and people. When I voted for the first time, I stood with my parents in a Ducky Presbyterian church. It was a primary election, and a woman working with me asked what kind of ballot I would like. Democrat, I said. Both of my parents asked for Republican ballots. How did that happen? The woman asked. I wish I knew, my father said. People who have drastically different views than me are not some separated group I rarely interact with. Oftentimes, they're the people we are closest to. Having different beautiful views from my parents has taught me the importance of and often the necessity of tolerance. Tolerance does not mean separation. It does not mean ignoring and being completely distinct from those who have different views or opinions. Engaging in respectful, meaningful dialogue with those who have different views is important in reaching common ground and expanding our own worldviews. While it might be easier to ignore controversial and divisive issues such as gun control or abortion, discussing these issues is essential to promoting tolerance on both sides. Whether it be at the Thanksgiving dinner table or the presidential debates, tolerance helps to bridge divides. The goal of tolerance is not to convince someone with a different opinion to believe. It is to reach a common understanding and mutual respect for those who are different. Understanding unique experiences and perspectives that contribute to their ideas is significant, and it brings people together rather than tearing them apart. In a country that might not be divided by boundary lines, but is certainly divided by political and ideological lines, tolerance is essential to the well-being of our nation. Just as Abraham Lincoln advocated for a nation of unity in a highly divisive period of time, tolerance can help bring people together when divisiveness is threatening to tear them apart. Thank you.
So great to hear from these students. We will now get to hear from our graduate students. First, we'll hear from University of Utah graduate scholarship winner, Bang Lord. He is an environmental humanities graduate student at the University of Utah. There he is a Mellon Community Engagement Fellow and works to foster relationships between environmental institutions and the Asian American, and Pacific Islander communities throughout the Salt Lake Valley. And I should add, also a former Hinckley intern. Glad to have you with us. Then we were fortunate to hear from Sarah Johns, the BYU graduate tolerance scholarship winner. Sarah Johns is a current 3L at BYU Law School and recently returned from her summer work at Obidat Law in Amman, Jordan. Sarah has published in Notre Dame's Journal of International and Comparative Law and is incredibly interested in human rights issues in the Middle East and appreciates the power that has been brought by the law to people of all backgrounds.
Nyozong and hello everyone for being here today. I'm looking up and down because I'm reading my about 500 word essay. So if you want to turn to your other senses and close your eyes. I just wanted to thank the Collins Team, Dialogue team, and I think the Institute newsletter. So good job, Jason, for the opportunity to share my essay this afternoon. And one note I wanted to make was, I had to be honest, writing tolerance theme for tolerance, adjacently themed pieces, and I'll speak for myself, always invokes most trauma sometimes, but nonetheless, writing in general and sharing the past several years have also helped me get through the toughest situations. So thank you, everybody, for the self-therapy session and an essay product that hinges on hope, which maybe we all can use one of these days, because I know I do. Thank you ahead for following along. Tolerance is an act of patience and grace, held in tandem with the hopes for understanding and care. In an ever-evolving society of cultural, religious, and political diversity and difference, tolerance can serve as a pause, an opportunity for learning, relearning, and growing to better be in relation and community with such diversity and difference. In a world of difference and uniqueness, tolerance is a bridge for knowledge gaps, communication gaps, gaps that naturally arise with difference. It is an ability that, if carefully and patiently embraced, can serve life lessons and purposes of sympathy, empathy, and care. Tolerance was my mother staring deep into my eyes on a high school weeknight in shock, confusion, and pain. I had just confessed to her that I don't like girls. In a stern tone, she shares that she doesn't understand and leaves my room. Tolerance was also allowing my mom to feel all that she did in that moment, in the days, weeks, and years to follow. On the other hand, tolerance is a lifelong hope that my Hmong refugee and immigrant mother and father could one day accept and realize I'm still the son they were once so proud of. Multiple worlds, Laos, then Thailand refugee camps, and now America, fostered unimaginable change to my parents. Being gay didn't seem to exist before, and therefore, it must be a phase, not an identity, not significant. Being gay wasn't Hmong, it wasn't shamanism, and it had never been a part of their world. While at 15, discovering that there are others like me out there, at school, everywhere, I could no longer deny who I am. If anyone asked me at the age of 8 years old or 13 if I was gay, which was a question I was asked from what seemed to be the age of 5, I would immediately deny it. I tolerated that question from childhood until my teenage years. That question haunted me, and to my parents, me being gay haunted them. Despite such fear, lack of understanding, and even anger, my parents and I, with time and giving each other grace, allowed ourselves to sit in these tensions separately, together, to see where it could take us. Tolerance isn't always easy, but it can teach us the greatest lessons in life if we allow it to. Tolerance is essential to a growth mindset. It allowed my parents to move beyond judgment and toward deeper care for me, even if that took 10 years. Tolerance allowed me to let a part of my identity I had been suppressing for so long in. And tolerance allows for the complexities of the world, of people and differences, to better make sense together. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here and for investing your time in tolerance and peacemaking. Bridging divides in America today is not only possible, but well within our reach. Although many say that this is the most divisive time in the history of this nation, I feel optimistic about the future. I believe that we already possess everything that we need to bridge divides. There's no special formula or charismatic leader necessary to change the American narrative. All that we need are willing and able Americans to step up to the plate of compassion and love. My journey as a peacemaker in the LGBTQ+ religious divide happened quite accidentally. I am very openly religious, and so I never would have guessed there was space for women to lead on issues surrounding the LGBTQ+ community. The opportunity to be involved in this sacred way came through sincere relationships with members of that community. And from these relationships grew understanding and a desire to make space for these friends in all places. I decided to use my leadership in Boston to create a platform for LGBTQ+ peacemakers. Doing so has helped to foster compassion and relationship building between religious individuals, religious LGBTQ+ individuals, and non-religious LGBTQ+ individuals. There was nothing revolutionary about these efforts. They all stemmed naturally from genuine relationships. I argue that the solution to divides in the US are sincere relationships created by proximity to one another. Though great leaders may inspire us to get proximate with one another, the solution lies with each of us, the people. Bridging divides starts in our homes, neighborhoods, schools, churches, and hearts. Bridging divides happens when good people get to know each other and do what it takes to love one another. It does not require that we retreat from the ground of one's deeply held beliefs. Instead, it requires that we entreat each other to love through our differences. I am confident that the world is full of good people who are capable of this important feat. In my experience at BYU Law, when people are given a chance to step up with compassion, they do so in mass. Though we live in a society often defined by sides, stances, and what we feel are all or nothing choices, we, the people, can change this reality. We can choose not to make important issues mutually exclusive by improving our understanding that each person possesses unique value systems, and that is not only okay, but adds important diversity to our society. Understanding when it is truly mutual sponsors the kind of love and compassion that will bridge divides. I have faith in good people and trust that as we get proximate with one another, the divides between us will heal as we manage them with compassion, understanding, and love. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to all our remarkable students. Grateful for that. At this point, we're gonna take some questions. What we'll do is, looking for questions that have been submitted to hashtag TNV Utah. Or at Tolman's meetings. And those will be passed on to the two of us, who will be fielding questions for our students.
Can we also have a microphone? So I haven't been texting, I've been sharing the questions with it. Talk to them, I can do that.
Yes, it's a hard point. We've been taking questions, not.
To take one off of the feed, or should we ask for questions from them?
I don't know, is someone to your ears? Please.
Okay.
That's my, wait for microphone, that's okay.
Hi, this has been a great gathering. To the essay winners, I'm very impressed with folks who are trying to get rid of their red lines, which would be their conditions under which they will not speak to someone. I'll talk to you if you're here, but if you're here, I will not talk to you. I have a lot of compassion for folks that feel that some kinds of discussions are so personally threatening and existential that they can't even engage in them. But I'm interested in if you've thought about not having red lines when it comes to discussion, or if you have them, or what that struggle is like.
You have a microphone to pass. Would anybody like to take it? No, we'll turn it on. There's a little button on the side. There you go. You can take it off.
Since I grabbed the microphone, I guess I'll give it a shot. Thanks for that question. I mean, I think when I think about red lines and kind of referring to my story too, I think a lot about my relationship with my parents, right? And their background, and they didn't have an education. They were refugees, immigrants, and they were born and raised and lived in a whole different world, right? I don't know if they would consider themselves Americans, right? They always talked about homeland, which was Laos, and the refugee camps and those experiences. And so I say that to say, I grew up being born here, you know, in that blur, right? There wasn't a red line because I had to navigate, well, this is how American public school is, for example, right? This is, you know, how they're framing, you know, this theme or this topic, yet at home, we then never talk about it, right? And so for me, those growing up in a home household, but maybe, you know, related to a lot of, you know, refugee and immigrant households too, right? Those lines are blurred because of this difference in upbringing and kind of national culture, but at the same time, it's beautiful because I got to grow up in two different households, and I almost, you know, I say I also grew up in two different cultures, you know, and so for me, navigating those conversations as I'm, you know, through undergrad, through graduate school, maybe PhD school, you know, I'm thinking a lot about, you know, how I grew up and, you know, where my parents' views could have politically aligned if, you know, they grew up here. And I think about the importance, as I shared in my essay, around being patient and being okay with disagreement, but having kind of that hope to move beyond those tensions. that could absolutely arise from the uncomfortableness, the disalignment of values and opinion. And so that's a quick remark I have.
Thank you for that question. Something I've heard that I love is that we have to get to know each other before we can learn to love each other. And I think, at least for me personally, I don't feel that I have those red lines, but I don't think that means that you can't have boundaries in conversations, especially with such charged issues of faith versus identity. That can feel very difficult. And so I don't think it's wrong to enter a conversation and say, this is who I am, and I hope that you'll be respectful of that, and let's talk. But I do think that curiosity is so important, and we shouldn't stifle that by not speaking to one another. One of my favorite role models in this area is Reverend Marian Edmonds Allen. I hope you know her and know what she's doing. She's incredible. But when she came and spoke to our law school, she said, "You guys, there are no stupid questions. Ask me anything. I'm not going to get mad." And it was in that environment that we saw a lot of change in our student body when people came together. And so when we can create that environment, absolutely, but definitely proceed these conversations with personal boundaries. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah, I think being accepting of and open towards conversation with everyone, even if they're different from you, is a pretty fundamental aspect of trying to move towards equality. And I think that maybe being aware of potential biases or red lines, however you want to frame it, can maybe make you be able to like come towards being more open and accepting to people around you who are different.
Like, in addition to what everyone else has said, like, when, like, for example, the Jelly Housing Coffee that I wrote about, I have to see their conversations are usually not really dialogue, but a flame war of sorts, of constant argument between both sides. It's not like, it's not as like, it's not a red line. We talk to each other. That's more like a red trench line where they are going to confide in each other. And I think that it's important for them to be able to discuss things not through insults and Palestinians are Nazis, the Israelis are Nazis, or just otherwise our relationship like that is also not true, but instead like seek an understanding of the conflict and understanding of both sides and can help create dialogue. Thank you.
And thank you for that question. I want to remind the students that are here, the two of you, text us a good question, randomly selected $250 right there. I see the checkbook. That was real, wasn't it? Okay, so be thinking and submit something. We do have a first question from Christina that was asked. It says, how can we learn from our mistakes by admitting to them while not suffering from cancel culture? One of our panelists, who would like to take that one first? Who's gonna go? Professor?
Well, I'll use an example from the legislature's history. One of the ways that there was a breakthrough in Utah between the Equality Utah folks and the more conservative legislators was that they sat down in a neutral territory and they just went around and said, please say something about yourself and make yourself vulnerable to each of us. And they shared frustrations and limitations and disappointments and aspirations. And that was the beginning. It took years, it took several years for that to mature into something. And I think that's a good way to proceed. The spirit of the question, though, does add to that. And maybe a good icebreaking technique that if we had time, we should do in this room is every person should ask themselves, what fundamental issue have I been wrong about in the past? And what changed my mind? In the marriage equality book that I wrote, a lot of people who were dead set against marriage equality for any of the LGBTQ folks changed their minds when their daughter came out as a lesbian and had children. When a neighbor was transgender. And they had big sympathy for the neighbor. And a lot of gay people changed their minds about religious individuals after they got to know some of them and worked with some of them on issues relating to equality, not always LGBTQ equality, but just equality. Mr. I'm a procedure teacher, so.
I'll take another question from those who've been texting it in. And this one somewhat relates to the first question. It's really the question about the absence of bias, right? The people who aren't, because those of you who are here are interested right off the bat, and somewhat at least, in terms of dialogue. The question was from Olivia, how can we encourage people to join a respectful dialogue when they don't want to engage? Leaving the zero class.
Well, so one thing I think is really remarkable about this conversation, it's not only the spirit of goodwill, but the fact that this legislature again and again and again has managed to solve cultural war issues by de-escalating. And I think sometimes that is lawmakers themselves signaling that this needs to stop, and they bring everybody in the same room. I'll let Representative Peterson talk about that process, and President Adams talk about that process. But I've always been acutely aware that this legislature has a really incredibly short period of time to do its work. And somehow that seems to focus the mind in a way that's very important. So, but far be it for me to talk about that. Perhaps Representative Peterson and President Adams could say something.
I'll take a quick shot at that. Just that, when we started this bill, this conversion therapy bill, I had a plan for it, and it didn't take very long before I knew that plan was going to crash and burn, and probably for very good reasons. And to be honest, we had met once during the summer about another bill. And it wasn't a great meeting. Right? It wasn't a great meeting. And so again, I had in my mind what I wanted this bill to do. Like as I said earlier, I wanted to make sure kids could talk. And I had a way that I thought that we could make that happen. Maybe that's a good way to make that happen. I sort of wanted to make it happen. I hadn't thought of that like that before, but I think that's sort of what my mindset was. I was going to make it happen. And fortunately, we got in a room for I don't know how many hours. I mean, seriously, hours and hours, many days. I mean, it wasn't. We spent hours and hours, and we became friends. And I learned about Marina and who she is. And I learned about Troy, where his family, and you can't sit in the room forever and not ever talk about personal things. You end up becoming friends. And I wanted to make sure that their needs were met. And I think they thought the same thing. They want to make sure that my needs are met. And we don't agree on very much politically. But there was something magical about being in the same room, walked in the same room, and talking and learning to love each other and wanting to learn about each other so we could move forward, because it wasn't going to happen if that didn't happen. Does that make any sense?
That's what now.
Thank you, Patty.
Maybe I'll but thank you for that. Maybe I'll go back a little further. In 2003, a legislator by the name of Clark Christensen and I, we passed a piece of legislation that defined marriage between a man and a woman, and very restrictive. And we thought so much of it that we passed it as the Constitution. And then people of Utah voted on it, that it went into law in 2003, 4 period of time. And then in 2013, a Pennsylvania court judge, Robert Shelby, overturned it as a constitution. Now, Utah may be a little different in the fact that we solve problems, but we are no different in the fact that we have very deep-seated feelings and emotions. And if that was the case on both sides of that issue, we decided in 2014 we wouldn't hear any type of legislation. And Troy will remember as well, there were 13 individuals who blocked from Equality Utah, they blocked with me, and they were thrown in jail. So in 2015, and Professor Wilson showed the two trains colliding. That's what we were looking at. There's no question about it. Equality Utah fell in both. I had constituents that because how could you have a Tensor court judge overturn the will of the people? The constitutional amendment that we put in place in Utah. They wanted us to secede. They were very, 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 very frustrated. And I guess my answer to the question is don't give up, because we sat down and we decided we would work through it. We had some good guidance. We had the Church of Jesus Christ letters things that forward. I think 4 members of the 12 of the 12 told us to find a way to blend these two things together. And it became very, very difficult, but we found a way. And you find a way because you're trying to do the right thing. And it was a tough principle for me to grasp, but in 2003, there's no question about it. I felt I was defending my deep-seated religious beliefs. I felt I was doing their job. And then as I understood more and understood that it's exactly what Representative Peterson said, that we're all citizens of the United States. We're all people. And you read the New Testament, you hear things being taught, and I think they're universal principle, whether New Testament or any religion, is you try to love your neighbor, you try to turn the other cheek, you try to do good to those that hate you. And I realized that in 2015, as we found a way to solve the problem, that I was actually living my religion and I wasn't defending it. And there's a big difference. And I think as you sit down and talk to people, there's a way to figure out how to, and it takes a lot of self-control on your part, because there is no lack of passion in Utah on either one of these issues, even though we do solve issues and we're unique in that way. But it takes a lot of personal self-control to be able to open up the dialogue and actually try this.
Follow up, Professor Rich. I wanted to go back to the question, how can we get more people engaged? And my answer is coming out of the closet. Is the more people all around the country, just in Utah, know openly lesbian people, gay people, bisexual people, transgender, questioning, non-binary people, and have a face and an identity as relatives, as neighbors, as students, as professors, the better off you are. But it's not just LGBTQ people coming out of the closet. President Adams just came out of the closet. As not your usual suspect for someone who's avid about equality rights for sexual and gender minorities. And that's very important. That there be counter narratives to the narrative, if you're a conservative Republican from Utah, then you must be anti-gay and you must want to disrespect trans people. And so I would urge gay people to come out of the closet, as I am now, as religious and as respectful of Presbyterians, pretty liberal for the most part, but I taught at a Catholic institution, which I loved. I love coming to Utah and dealing with the church that has different doctrines than what I have. So I've come out of the closet as a religious gay person who actually loved teaching at a Catholic university, much more than Yale, which is very arrogant, all that. Jesuits, I love them. And I love coming out to Utah. So I think we need more of that. We need more surprising confessions, which I'm gonna call coming out of the closet.
We have time for one last question. There's one. On the round. If not, we'll take one from the people who submitted questions, but we'll give you all one last chance.
Okay, oh, please, have a gentleman here. You broke one?
I love the student essays, wonderful job. I'd like to hear if there's a community leader, political figure, someone who has truly inspired you in the area of tolerance.
There are quite a few. I mentioned Marian Evans Allen, but one that owns my heart would be Jesus Christ. I feel that that is where I've learned the most to love the people around me and to create the most simple of peacemaking. In the law school, we have work by an incredible LDS artist with different pictures of Jesus Christ and his roles that we can adopt as attorneys. And one of them is as a judge, and it's the image with the woman who was accused of adultery and said, "Go sin no more. I don't judge you." And that's the example that inspires me the most, especially in these issues.
Thanks for the question. I think I defer a lot to my parents, because I hate to keep referencing my essay, but they've been through the secret war in Laos, through having to force themselves to politically align with what they knew to be their home country, and the CIA and their allies during that war. And so I think a lot about those political, cultural tensions that manifested in ways unimaginable, and how much they tolerated each other, these changes, and at one point maybe still me, and I would say one thing I do really respect about this Dialogue Means campaign is kind of reframing tolerance. I feel like it's always framed in a way of deficit, right? And writing my essay, and reflecting, and hearing other folks' stories too, right? I think there's a lot of reframing we need to do to things like this single word that I think could bring more hope and opportunity. And my second response is, I'm gonna say it because I'm in Utah and I can say it now. But meaning, I also really truly look up to David Archuleta, who has a history of being affiliated with the church. I admired David since his American Idol days for his music and whatever reasons that might be affiliated with that. But also just a few years ago when he took the big step of sharing his story and allowing himself to be different. And I think that has made huge, waves, and ripple effect. And so it's not the reason why I'm in Utah, but absolutely, David Archuleta is definitely one of those guys I admire and adore in many ways that has also demonstrated tolerance.
Yeah, that's a great question. Someone who came to mind for me is Mitt Romney, and I think he's a good example of someone who maybe works with people from all sides, and it's a good example of bipartisanship. And I also think he's a good example of maybe going with your conscience and not necessarily party lines. So that's my answer.
It's like as I was homeschooled growing up, I never had any of those exposure to other beliefs and differences until I came to college. So getting to college, I saw that everyone is different. Everyone has their own views and their own beliefs. And amazingly, I feel like
personally exciting me most is all the people around me, my college campuses, and seeing and interacting with people touching police than I do, and you know, their lives is different than I do for a reason different background than I was. And I feel like we can learn a lot from our people, and just taking time to pause and listen to them, to help make the world a better place.
Thank you very much for those questions. Those of you who are online and those in the room, we appreciate you. Our final speaker today will be President Stuart Adams, the president of the Utah State Senate. Before being elected to the Senate, President Adams served for 4.5 years on the Utah House of Representatives. He is the former chairman of the Utah Transportation Commission and currently chairman of the Military Installation Development Authority. Please welcome President Stuart Adams.
Appreciate being the concluding speaker, but I wanted to make sure before I started that I just welcomed everyone to the Capitol here. And we love this place because of the great things that happen. Hopefully you feel comfortable. And those of you from out of town or those who are visiting, being with us here. As I came over, I noticed they sat me on the end of the table. As I actually went to my seat, I passed these 4 grade students, and I mentioned to them that I thought they sat as according to what age. I was over there with them, trying to convince them I was close to their age. They didn't buy that, but I tried. And you know, but after I sat down, one of them leaned over to me and said, "You're not here because of your age. You're here with us because we're winners." And then but I actually thought that I was a winner, and they thought I was a winner because of something I had done. And but I then realized after I listened to their essays, and I think about the future of this country. And as I listened to their essays, I realized that I wasn't. And I'm a winner because of them. In fact, we're all winners because our future is so very bright. Because the 4 people that are here, the 4 grade students, but also what they represent about the future of Americans. So I thought that was very, very, very appropriate. Now, we did something in 2015, and very often it's called the Utah Compromise. We brought together the rights of both the LGBTQ community, housing and employment, and protected religious liberties. And everyone I think who knows me knows that I just don't like it. And the reason I don't like the Utah Compromise is because I do, and Bill says, I'm a very conservative legislator, have deep-seated religious beliefs. And my beliefs are absolutely not compromising. And we didn't. And nor are Equality Utah's beliefs compromising. They would not, Troy would not agree, and nor would Maria, anything that would compromise their beliefs. But we did something that didn't cause anyone to compromise their beliefs. We protected one another. We protected one another's beliefs. And that is unique. And I think that's something hopefully that you remember. We about what we did. It was hard for me to again wrap my head around it to begin with, but now I understand clearly that you actually protect your rights and give yourself additional protections when you reach out to try to help other people. In America, we live, but I hope there's no question about it. We live in the greatest country on the planet. We have rights that don't exist many other places, the freedom of speech, freedom of expression. And we have those unbelievable liberties that we all love. As I look around the world today, we have pretty big contentious problems. We see Israel, we see Ukraine, we see other things that are happening. And that they're not unique to today. They've always existed. In fact, even the challenges we see inside our own country have always existed. We see differences in opinion. We see it within our friends. We see it in our families. And those challenges continue to exist. So, but I think right now they're maybe made a little bit more acute because of some of the technology, some of the ability we have to communicate, how we express things. And I would ask this younger Gen Z population if they could help us navigate that new technology so we might be able to understand better how to use those great assets that are there. And then I maybe end with a challenge. And the challenge would be, and not only for them, but maybe for all of us. My challenge would be that we stand up. We stand up and try to protect someone that we don't agree with. Or to do. My challenge would be that we try to listen to someone we don't agree with. And that is hard to do because it's hard to listen. It's hard to sit and listen and not want to tell them people. And then my third challenge would be is we try to understand someone we don't agree with. And if we do that, it will make all the difference. It has in my life. I appreciate people.
We'd like to announce the two students who received the social media engagement prize and afterwards, Dylan check. Christina Goodwin and Carter Yates. And we will be having a reception out of here immediately following these adjournments. It's put together by Golden Beast for them. And I hope you can join me one last time in thanking our amazing parents, our students, catalysts, Senator Adams, Governor Cox. Please join me.